Welcome to Antitrust Code by Concurrences. Concurrences is the leading antitrust database with over 30,000 articles on competition law. Concurrences is also the largest network of antitrust experts, with lawyers, economists, enforcers, and academics in 85 countries. By listening to this podcast, you will learn the fundamentals of competition law and hear about the latest antitrust news, thanks to our guests, the best experts in the antitrust world.
Welcome to the Antitrust Code series of podcasts by Concurrence, where the latest developments and trends in competition law around the world are explored. My name is Hugh Hollman. I'll be your host today, and with me is Chairman Mahmoud Momtaz, the head of the Egyptian Competition Authority. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Dr. Momtaz, you have led the ECA since January of 2021, and you have overseen some significant changes and achievements in the Egyptian competition landscape. Could you tell us a little bit about your background and what motivated you to take on this role?
Sure. So I would say I started my career in ECA and Egyptian Competition Authority since the start. Started as a case handler right after I graduated from university with an economics background. And then after working for a couple of years in ECA, I've been more amazed with law. So I decided to go back to school, study law at the time. And it was a very interesting period because you're kind of learning what you're applying in real practice. So that made me more interested in exploring more the connection between law and economics afterwards. So I did my master's and afterwards my PhD in Hamburg in law and economics. Afterwards, I've moved to Washington, D.C., so I worked a little bit with the World Bank, working primarily on the Middle East region and also Southeast Asia, which also gave a little bit of more understanding of the regional landscape, if I may say. And then afterwards, I've returned back to this position back in 2021.
That's a fascinating background. So when you first took over the position, what did you have in mind for it? Did you have any particular strategy that you planned to put in place?
Yes, actually with our colleagues at ECA, we worked together to set a strategy for 5 years. So we put a strategy 2021 to 2025, and we focused on mainly 4 pillars. The first one is the enhancement of the enforcement of competition law. And this had several pillars like developing a new market economic intelligence department to look into markets and give early red flags on which market we need to investigate, we need to look at, and so on. Also, we thought that after we looked into most best practices of the OECD and so on, and looking into how much public procurement is something of a bigger matter for the economy and how much does it represent within our GDP, that made us decide to open a new department, which is a bid rigging department focusing primarily on bid rigging. So this is, in brief, I would say the first pillar with other more sub-pillars. The second pillar was focusing on competitive neutrality, and this is, I think, is a pillar that we look at as very important because we are of the understanding that whenever you have an economy that state-owned enterprises are working in and private sector are working in the same place, you need to make sure that you level the playing field. And I don't believe that there is no other best suited agency to do so other than the competition agency. So we developed the competitive neutrality strategy, which also made a lot of progress, like establishing the High Committee for Competitive Neutrality headed by the Prime Minister and a number of ministers within the cabinet, especially the economic ones. And this helped us that any investor that has a problem with competitive neutrality if it's a regulation, if it's a governmental decision or so on, he can come and complain, and accordingly going to be investigated by ECA and being looked at by the High Committee, and swift actions, corrective action will be taken accordingly. Also on this side, we looked into, we actually developed our guidelines on state measures, And this is kind of the guidelines that each state entity should follow before issuing a new regulation, to make sure that it's, I would say, competitively looked at with a competition lens. This also made us see we need to look on this progress, how this thing's going to move. And currently we're working on launching our competitive neutrality index, which is a perception kind of an index that looks into how different sectors look within competitive neutrality agenda, in that sense, looking at tax neutrality, regulatory neutrality, public procurement neutrality, and so on. So these are the main pillars of the second pillar, which is competitive neutrality. The third one is mostly on competition culture, and we do believe in ECA that we need to have a competition culture, not only awareness in a sense, and that's why we focused on 5 main groups, which are first of all, of course, the public and NGOs. Second would be the media. Thirdly, the government itself. Fourthly, of course, the businesses, and we established our compliance toolkit to give them more understanding and so on. And fifth, the judiciary. So these are the 5, I would say, stakeholders that we really focus on in establishing competition culture, with different programs to each of them. And the fourth and last pillar is enhancement of the ECA internal procedures and so on, to make it easier for our employees and for the public and for businesses to work with ECA in a very agile and at the same time accurate manner.
Those are so many very impressive initiatives. Of all of those, which do you think was the most challenging in putting into place?
I think all of them, I think, in a way or another, has its own side of a challenge. But I think looking into, for example, establishing a competitive neutrality agenda, I think this was something very interesting because sometimes you need to interfere in a different with different agencies, and to have a common understanding of what competition means and how competition should be applied. And I believe we were lucky enough that with all interaction we had with different stakeholders, either from the government side or from agencies that look into matters, I think they were understandable of competition. And I think it helped us a lot having this higher committee established, with ECA being the rapporteur of this committee. This helps a lot, I think, in establishing the competition culture and within government. Also working with businesses to give them an understanding that ECA is not the policing agency, but rather is the enabling agency of competition, and that competition at the end of the day is for the benefit not only for consumers but also for businesses, and helping businesses to be protected against anti-competitive practices themselves. I think this is the message that would need time, of course, but I think it's something that we try to embed in our interaction with different stakeholders.
Perhaps turning then to the ECA itself and how it's structured and staffed. Would you mind explaining the setup of the ECA?
Sure. So ECA is staffed with around 100 employees right now, more than 100 at this point, aiming to increase to 150 by 2025. We're structured into 2 different sides. Of course, there's the technical side, which I would focus on now, and the administrative side. So with the technical side, we have the chairperson with the board that decides on cases. And then afterwards, we do have an executive director that should be in place. This position is vacant, but an executive director will be there, looking into different departments. So below the executive director, you have the bid rigging department, which looks into focusing on bid rigging and public procurement. We do have the investigation departments, which looks into different antitrust cases, abusive dominance, vertical restraints, and cartels. And thirdly, we do have the Merger and Acquisitions Department, or the Economic Concentrations Department, which is a newly established department recently. So all of these three main departments, in addition to the IT forensics, which has to do with forensics in terms of bid rigging or other cases, cartel cases, when we look into computers and so on, and our Dawn raids. This is the department that focuses on these matters. And also we do have, under the chairperson, there's a couple of departments. So the Competitive Neutrality Department reports to the chairman, and also the Economic Intelligence Department reports to the chairman at this point. And on the administrative side, there's the finance and admin and so on. These are most of supporting staff or supporting departments that also reports to the chairman directly.
You referenced an Economic Intelligence Department. What do they do?
Sure. So the Economic Intelligence Department, they have three main roles. One is market monitoring. So currently we're trying to hire more of data scientists and so on to look into matters that has to do with understanding pricing mechanisms, understanding how markets dynamics work, and at the same time give us red flags. So for example, we worked on different price capping mechanisms that looked into different prices of different products. So currently we developed a new system that looks into, I think, more or less 1 million product per day, or 1 million brand per day. And this helps us a lot to look into, especially food markets that we'll give much of importance to at this time. And also, on the other hand side, periodically report on special sectors that we believe of interest to us. So it's similar to a market inquiry, but in a different style or a different landscape. The other thing is also that this department looks into bid rigging mechanisms. So it looks at grasps the data on different bids and run different probabilities on these data and set red flags on which bids that might be rigged or so on. On the other hand side, also this department looks into the economic tools that different departments would work with. So this is also an important aspect, to have internally different tools, economic tools, to look into different cases, and also how to calculate different calculations, either for settlements or for harm assessment and so on. So this department mainly also looks into these parts, and also setting some of our internal guidelines in economic sense. Yeah.
And the folks that are in this department, are they mainly economists or also lawyers, or a combination of the two?
Mainly economists and data scientists. So these are the two main people, main calibers in this department.
And across the authority, do you rely both upon economists and lawyers?
Yes. Of course, in terms of percentage, we do have much more lawyers than economists at the time. So I would believe we're talking about 70% lawyers and 30% would be of economists. Yeah, that's more or less the ratio.
You also said that you just formed a new department, the Merger Control Department.
Yes.
And of course, what's imminent is I think that there's a new merger control regime just about to take effect as of June 1st. You're moving from the post-closing to a pre-merger control regime. What led you to change and move from post-closing to pre-merger?
Sure. I think this is a long history of the Egyptian competition regime as a whole. So I think that this would take us back to the early writings of the competition law back in 2005, that there was a discussion, should we apply merger control regime since the start of the implementation of the new regulation or not? And at the time there was a decision that we can take it a little bit step by step, similar to other jurisdictions that took it this way. So we start more with, firstly, with the anti-competitive practices, abuse, vertical restraints, cartels, and so on. And then we wait for a period of time, and then we apply merger control regime. And this became back and forth for several years, I would say, in different amendments, different opinions, I would say, on how this would impact the economy and so on and so forth. And again, as you may know, 148 countries around the world currently applying merger control regime, and currently we're being part of COMESA, and COMESA is applying a merger control regime, and we're currently working very closely with them since 2013 on their merger regulations and their merger control and cases and so on. So I think it's becoming eminent that we need to look into merger control regime. This also was looked into very carefully because, as you may know, when you're having a devaluation in the currency, then companies becoming more cheaper to get acquired. Hence, you want to make sure that these acquisitions and these mergers are not harmful to the markets, and basically will not block future foreign direct investments or any or local investments to enter these markets. So I always look into merger control as a safe valve for markets. And I always looked into it. It's not a burden. It's rather making an enabling competitive environment for investors to work in. And that's how we look at it. When we developed our department, we've been working closely with this department. Been established 2 years ago, and it's been working very closely with COMESA on their cases. And also we've been working closely with different agencies like the Ministry of Health and the Drug Administration on different cases and acquisitions that they're taking place in the healthcare sector. So I think we already looked into and gave opinions on more than 500 cases since the start of this department, which gave us a little bit of, I would say, practical experience to move very agile and very fast, because I think this is where you need to give legal certainty, that there is a due process and there's timelines that are being respected. And this is how we also crafted the regulation in that sense, because we don't have stopping the clock since the start. It's ongoing, so we do have strict deadlines. If we didn't reply to the parties, then it's a go merger without our approval. So that's why we wanted to make everything very neat and very defined, to make it easy for anybody that's looking into acquiring or merging or having a joint venture with firms in Egypt. That it's very easy, very smooth process, and going to be very understandable.
So the executive regulations have just been issued that actually set out how this will work to a certain degree. There's a phase 1 and a phase 2.
Yes.
As you were saying, there's a 30-day initial phase 1 period where you won't stop the clock. Do you think that you'll be able to get decisions out within that 30-day period of time?
Yes.
And if that is the case, is there going to be more of a pre-notification period put in place in order to ensure that you get the information so that you can review it during the 30-day period? I'm wondering how you're going to balance the burden on the enforcement when it comes to actually reviewing within that 30-day period.
No, I think what we've done, and as I mentioned earlier, the part that we already started working on these on 500 cases before. So we always put ourselves on this kind of timeline. So we tested our timelines and we found ourselves comfortable with the timelines, given that we do have the information needed and so on. And also the Economic Intelligence Department helped us with having databases on different sectors of the economy. So I would say, for example, currently we do have a full database on pharmaceuticals. For example, we do have a couple of databases on other products. which helps us to speed up the process. And again, as you've mentioned, we also would give leeway for pre-merger discussions. The parties can come in, talk to us, and that would help both of us on speeding up the decision making on this case. And also, I think with our new merger notification document is going to be having enough information that we would need at the first phase to give a reply within the 30 days.
So when does the clock start? Does the clock start when the filing's made, or does it start when you give clearance to go ahead and do a filing, so that you notify the parties that the clock has actually begun?
Okay, so how we're planning to craft it, it's basically that the law says that when you file a full filing with all the relevant documents on the file, so that means that we need to say yes, this filing is okay, and all documents have been submitted. I think we'll be giving 3 to 5 working days to reply to the parties saying that this file is complete and this is the start date of the 30 days, and this is how we're planning to be set it out, and this is going to be clearly written in our notification forms.
Will you be issuing additional guidance for what needs to be filed as of June 1st?
Yes, I think in next month we're going to be issuing the notification form. It's already done, and we are also issuing a couple of infographics and also a Q&As to make it easier for people to I would say understand how the system going to work. And again, since the law have been set in place back in December 2022, I think we had enormous questions coming up from law firms, companies, and so on, and we tried always to answer back on these cases. So I think there is an understanding already, prior understanding. And last year it was a year again that took place until the executive regulations to come up. So I think this year give a little bit of trust between stakeholders on how things are going to go. And again, as I mentioned, ECA, the primary goal of ECA in the application of this regime is to have a swift, agile, and correct assessment of these cases.
One of the changes as well, Dr. Momtaz, is that you've moved towards a turnover regime, in the sense that when certain turnover thresholds are triggered, then the filing is required. One aspect that appears to be true of the executive regulations is the fact that the target doesn't necessarily have to have Egyptian turnover for a filing to be required. So it could be the acquirer's turnover that triggers the turnover requirement. Do you have in mind, perhaps in your additional guidance, to indicate whether or not you're going to apply more of a local effects test in your actual assessment of mergers, or will that indeed be the case that an acquirer's turnover could end up triggering a filing requirement under the turnover thresholds?
No, it's correct. As you've mentioned, this is exactly how the law was crafted. But again, in our assessment is going to be focused on a more of a local assessment on how things are going to be locally looked at, and this is going to be easily understandable when you look on the questions and the data requested in the notification form. And again, we're similar to different jurisdictions that applied this before us, and I think we're not going to reinvent the wheel in this case. I mean, we focus more on our local nexus. Again, although our law states that we look at different things, even if the target is not operating in Egypt per se, but again, when we analyze the case, we're going to analyze it from a local perspective primarily, yes.
One of the key aspects that I think that has come up is the fact that the Egyptian pound has actually devalued quite a bit recently. which has effectively meant that the thresholds are, if you don't mind me saying it, so quite low. Have you thought about how you may address this going forward?
Sure. So I think it's a matter of assessment. So again, and as you know, also this means that our notification filing fees is very low. So that's I mean strikes the balance a little bit on the two sides. And from that perspective, I would say it's the timing of the assessment. So again, these cases, if with the low turnover and so on, that means that it's expected to have quick clearance because there is no maybe evidence of anti-competitive harm due to this transaction. So it's more of a quick look, maybe case that's going to be made accordingly. Again, we're still in the start of this of applying the law, but this is how it applied in different cases that we looked at. Either were COMESA notifications or were it opinions that we gave in the healthcare sector. This is how we looked into matters that even if they do have a very low turnover, which maybe at sometimes means that its low market shares won't affect markets, or this acquisition won't affect the market negatively.
With that quick look type approach, would there be a simplified filing form or a more simple way of filing? Less would be required, less detail perhaps?
In the beginning, we're not going to do this from the start, to be very frank, but it's in the plan that after a certain period of time we might have a simplified notification form in this case with a lower amount of data. But in the start, I would say we'd only have one notification form for all cases, and then afterwards, after a period of time, we might introduce new simplified forms.
You mentioned that you've been working a lot with COMESA, and that was also a way to learn quite a lot about the merge control, just generally for the agency. What will be the relationship with COMESA going forward? Will you still require a filing? Well, obviously you're going to require a filing in Egypt, but what do you anticipate happening with the COMESA?
So currently we're being in talks with COMESA on how we are going to apply the law. As you've mentioned, the law now requires a filing in Egypt. But again, COMESA currently also is working on amending the regulations. So we're working closely together on putting a framework on how this is going to apply and how filing within our jurisdiction is going to apply.
So the ECA has been very involved with setting up the Arab Competition Network. I believe that dates back to 2022. And the ECA has actually ended up chairing, as I understand it, or being the chairing member state since then. Could you talk a little bit about what led to the development of the Arab Competition Network, and what are the types of collaborations that are actually happening between the member states at this time?
Sure. So actually ECA, and I personally believe that regional understanding and regional collaboration is key to looking into competition matters. As you may know, anti-competitive practices are mostly cross-border these days, and collaboration and cooperation not only on anti-competitive practices but also on understanding of competition policy and applying a common understanding of competition policy is crucial. And the region, I would say, there's a different levels of understanding of competition, some of which are very recent, like Lebanon, that recently been introduced in 2022, and some are very old, like Tunisia, for example, and so on. But still, I think this was the start of it to have an understanding. So within the Arab League, we have this MOU that have been signed with all competition agency or member states to look into competition. And then there was the question of how we are going to implement this MOU, how this MOU is going to be effective in place. And here, Egypt, we came up with the idea that's, I think it's have been applied in the EU with the ECN and so on, is to establish a competition network. And this competition network is a way to implement the MOU on how to look into competition matter. And we said that we need to start with 3 working groups. The first working group is on enforcement, and the second working group is on mergers, and the third working group is on agency effectiveness. And the 3 working groups should be led by different countries to make sure that all of the countries are going to be involved in the establishment of the ACN and its working groups. And here we decided that Saudi Arabia is going to lead the enforcement side, Morocco is leading the M&As, and Egypt will be leading the agency effectiveness. And at the time, as you mentioned, Egypt has been elected by member states to be chairing the network for its inceptions and for the first 2 years. And I think it was very successful in my point of view, because we developed different tools and different techniques. So we started with very simple workshops with different case handlers working together on different topics, each country being involved with their own experience, their own cases, and so on. So this gives more understanding to different case handlers on different landscapes, different techniques, different tools to be applied on different cases. And then we elevated a little bit more on issuing guidance and guidelines and research papers. So last year, I think we issued around 7 research paper and / guidelines on different things, on establishing a competition, on different modes of structures of competition agencies, on special resale price maintenance, on looking into different violations, exclusivity, and so on. So these different guidelines, bid rigging, and so these guidelines help new agencies to look into how to establish their own framework and how to apply competition law. At the same time, for more matured agencies to have guidance and have a kind of an understanding of different modes and different techniques that other agencies look at, this was a very useful tool. And then we also, on the sideline, we elevated it to having a chat box, which is kind of with case handlers. If I am a case handler in Egypt, having question on, for example, how to define markets in the automotive sector, then I can pinch down, write the question, and then I can get replies from different case handlers in the different jurisdictions. And this would help to speed up the process, because I think peer-to-peer learning is very important. And this peer-to-peer learning are going to be echoing in our reports and our working techniques. And then also working together on understanding or looking at special cases that of interest to all member states. Now I think it's the time to elevate a little bit more after 2 years, and currently Saudi Arabia, we moved the chairmanship to Saudi Arabia this year in March. So this is where we would look into elevating it a little bit more, again, how we will be working with different stakeholders and on different cases, and how we can even have joint market studies and so on. Because again, I think competition is very important to enhance trade between member states, and similar to how the EU have established their trade and member states within the EU and the European Competition Network. I think this is where we're aiming at, but I think we're taking it step by step to make sure that we're putting the right foundations to the sustainability of this network and to the effectiveness of this network at this time.
Did you take inspiration from the International Competition Network and the work that's done by the OECD in thinking through the workshops and some of the policy papers, perhaps?
Yes, I think we used all of these tools. I think we've learned a lot from them. And I think making things to be also accessible to other member states were crucial. And I think it's how we craft it in a way that it's more user-friendly to member states. So I think even when we're looking into establishing the working groups, this year we established a new working group which looks into competition policy and advocacy, which also was inspired by the ICN advocacy working group. So I think it's, of course, OECD, ICN, the ECN, and all of these different, I would say, resourceful tools we were inspired by. Yeah.
At the beginning of our discussion today, you were saying about one of the key aspects of your strategic plan was disseminating competition culture, and that sounds like that's exactly what you're doing through the Arab Competition Network. So that's fascinating to hear.
Yeah, that's exactly how we're trying to do it, and I think also we did something that would to disseminate competition culture within universities. So we started what we call the Arab competition simulation. So in ECA we started the Egyptian competition simulation. We're getting students from legal and economic background. We started this back in 2009. And it was very successful because it's a useful tool to hire from, getting a pool of students that you can potentially hire from. And if not, again, it's a good word of mouth of how competition agencies work in their practical lives. So we expanded this to the Arab Competition Network, and we established this Arab Competition simulation. So now we're having competing universities from the Arab region, I think, and I've been surprised by how interested students are in this simulation. I was surprised to look into Algeria and Morocco, especially because in 3 days I found like we're receiving around 2,000 applications coming only from 2 countries, and I think it shows the interest in the topic, and it shows the potential of how competition could evolve in the future. And I think a couple of competition agencies even hired from the students that were within the simulation. And we usually we put a small ceremony for the students at the annual conference. So this year we were in Riyadh, and we had this ceremony in Riyadh celebrating the winning team. And I think it's a good thing to disseminate the culture not only within competition agencies of the Arab world, but rather even within students and universities to establish, I would say, an understanding of competition at a younger age, which would help you as a competition agency to have young scholars and legal professions understanding the risks of competition law and understanding how to comply with competition law.
I really couldn't think of a better way to build for the future. I mean, that sounds like a very promising initiative. We've covered a lot of ground, but if you were to say what was the most rewarding case or initiative during your tenure, what would that be?
I would say this is a hard question because I think I really cherish different aspects, but I think the competitive neutrality agenda was something that it's been hard to achieve. I would say it was not an easy task, but again, I think the persistent and the understanding of the government of how competition is important was key to the establishment of the competitive neutrality agenda and setting it within the state ownership agenda, and being a pillar within the state ownership policy, and having a separate chapter, which is chapter 7 of this policy, is a rewarding, I think, aspect. Also establishing and at last having a merger control regime. I think this is something that any case handler within ECA that worked in ECA was something that we always looked up for and looking forward to have it. And I think moving and giving an understanding to different stakeholders that this is the right way to go, and I think the support that we received from the government and from the parliamentarians on having this regime up and running, I think it's a successful story. And I think we, again, ECA built on previous attempts. I think it's a learning process that started since the inception of ECA in 2006, and that led us to where we are today.
And looking into the near future, where would you like the ECA to be in a couple of years' time? What in particular would you like to achieve?
I personally believe that it's important that to have, I would say, a local look at to make markets much more competitive, to have more cases, and to make sure that businesses try to comply with the law rather than avoiding the law. If we achieve this part, I think this is something that it's very important. Again, as you may know, competition is something, anti-competitive practices are always there and they will not go away. But again, making an anti-competitive practices with an understanding that you know that this is violating a competition law or something, and without understanding that this violates a competition law or something else. So the point is that we need to establish a culture on different scales, starting from the youth. Currently working with the Ministry of Education even to embed competition principles within schools' curricula, universities, businesses with the compliance toolkit and so on. And again, the government itself, when it issues any governmental regulations, to have this understanding of competition law. I think this is key to a local success of the competition ecosystem. Regionally, I think it's important that ECA keeps working with its peers, namely on the Arab side, of course, and also on the African side. I think we worked a lot with the African countries and with the African nations, and we think we established a lot of success stories. One of them, for example, establishing the African Heads Dialogue on digital markets. I think this is key to success, because again, the regional understanding of competition law and the regional implementation of competition law on different cases is important. Even we started with the African Confederation of Football case, CAF, back in 2017 and so on. I think this is a success story that also COMESA afterwards opened an investigation on. So that means that different cases, different modes and different impacts that impacts us all from different regimes. I think it's important to work together and really combat anti-competitive practices, especially the cross borders of them.
Dr. Momtaz, are there any sectors or industries that you think should have more, that you would like to pay more attention to going forward?
Actually, when we started our strategy, we had three main sectors that we looked at. It's the food sector, the pharmaceutical sector, and the education sector. With the education sector, we did a lot, I would say, this year on different cases. So we brought a couple of cartel cases. One of them was foreign publishing houses, cartels on school books, school curricula. And this was a price-fixing cartels and market allocation cartel. And also we worked a lot on school uniform this year, and with Concurrence we won this awards, the writing awards on our school uniform guidelines. And I think this was a very useful tool that also we work closly with the Ministry of Education to issue a decree that really prohibits schools from obliging parents to buy their school uniforms from a certain shop and so on. So this is to enhance a little bit competition in this sector. And also we looked into a bid rigging case, a major bid rigging case, which was in the publication of school books in the bids that have been issued by the Ministry of Education. So I think these are cases that really looked into, I would say, market screening the full value chain of the educational sector. We are still continuing on this scale. On the food sector, again, we're working closely with the Economic Intelligence Department and the different stakeholders on how to enhance competition. We've been focusing recently also on resale price maintenance cases and restriction on passive sales, so more on the vertical restraint side. Because again, the Egyptian market is a market where you have much more concentration upstream than downstream, hence maybe an area of more competition would be downstream on an intra-brand competition per se. Hence, I think this is where we started to also focus on different violations such as minimum resale price maintenance, restriction on passive sales, and most favored nation clauses. We had a couple of cases in this area recently in the food sector. We'll be continuing on that. Also, looking into the pharmaceuticals and healthcare sectors, I think this is a sector which is of importance to the whole population, and this is where we work very closely with the Ministry of Health and the Drug Administration to enhance competition in these sectors, and also to work on anti-competitive practices. So in early 2021, we had a couple of cases the health insurance sector, and we had a cartel case in the X-ray and examination sector. So it's an interesting sector to work in, and currently we're giving opinions to the Ministry of Health and the Drug Administration on different aspects of competition. And I think this collaboration between government entities is very important, especially in these sectors. So from that, I would say these are the three sectors we focused on and we will remain focusing on in the future. In addition to making sure that new markets like digital markets and so on is still an open market, there is no barriers to entry in a way or another, is also an area that we focus on, especially working with African heads dialogue on digital markets and also with COMESA and with different other aspects. And this is where we will really focus on. And again, we're looking forward again to the ACFTA, the African Continental Free Trade Area competition protocol, and see how things would evolve from there, because this is also an area that's going to be of interest, looking forward on how this is going to evolve. And we've been working closely with the Secretariat on how things are going to move forward on that front.
In thinking through some of the digital aspects, what do you think about potentially having something similar to the Digital Markets Act within Egypt? Do you think that that's a direction that you may consider taking?
I think at this stage it's not one of, I would say, the priorities, to be very frank on this. But again, we're learning and we're seeing how things are going to evolve also in the EU on the DMA, and see how things are going to be applying, because again it's still, I think it's an ongoing process even in the EU to understand how things are going to evolve and what are the impacts of this. And also we look on different jurisdictions, so I would say it was also interesting to look at the FTC, a recent publication on the non-compete clauses.
I was going to ask you just about that.
Yeah. So I think it's a very interesting also subject that also we're studying it, and to look into how these non-compete clauses into employment contracts are hindering competition or not. I think it's an interesting approach, and we're learning from different jurisdictions, but again, we're trying to make it more homegrown to be adjustable to our circumstances, our markets, and how things are going to move. And I think it's interesting how things are evolving around the world. But again, I think we're working closely with different jurisdictions. So currently we had guidelines issued on market definitions and dominance, and also we're going to be publishing very soon on vertical restraints. So these are the earlier guidelines that we did. So we'll continue on this path to make sure that also stakeholders have an understanding of how we're going to apply our rules and regulations, even in I would say, the very primary violations and primary aspects.
And Dr. Momtaz, are these guidelines and everything available on your website? Is that a place that our listeners could find them?
Yes, I think it's they're going to be uploaded, I think, up to next month. Everything is going to be on our website. We do have a new website that's going to be up and running this month. Currently we have the Arabic version up and running. The English version is going to be up and running by mid of May. So by mid of May, hopefully everything will be uploaded. The guidelines, the merger Q&As, merger acquisition Q&As, the application forms, and everything will be there on our website.
So that sounds very exciting. A lot of initiatives on the go. You've certainly been involved in an awful lot and pioneering quite a few areas within the region as well. I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and I'm confident that our listeners and watchers will do so as well. So thank you so much for your time today.
No, thank you for coming to Cairo, and thank you for having me. And I think it's always a pleasure to be working closely with Concurrence, and again, we're looking forward for future podcasts. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dress code by concurrences. If you want to read more about this topic, check the Concurrences website, where you can find all relevant articles. Follow us on Twitter @CompetitionLaws, and join the Concurrences group on LinkedIn to receive updates on our next podcast.